we can welcome Jacqui with us here. A big applause. Come on, guys.
Right, hello everybody. Right, as he said, only 50 minutes until lunch. Yes. So I'm here to talk to you about AI communication patterns. And there's a little question here. Can we communicate 10 times faster? You might have heard of the fabled 10x developer. So can we use AI to make ourselves into a 10x or 10 times communicator? Let's have a look. Now I want to start off with the dictionary.com and the Cambridge Dictionary Word of the Year for 2023, which might sound a little bit odd, but it won't when you see what it is. So, 2023 was the year of the hallucination when it comes to AI. It's given us some very interesting facts. It likes to tell us things, and it's very insistent that it's correct. But the thing with AI is that it really tries to answer your question, even if it doesn't know the answer. And we've had some really good hallucinations in the news. Like, there was one where a lawyer quoted cases in court in the US that had actually been made up by ChatGPT. He'd used ChatGPT to ask to get cases that he could use in court. The judge wasn't very happy about fake cases being quoted in court. There was also a mayor in Australia who was considering suing because ChatGPT had said that he'd pled guilty to a bribery claim and been in prison for it, when actually he was a whistleblower in that case and so wasn't guilty at all. And then there was a Texas professor who accused most of his class of plagiarism because he'd asked ChatGPT if it had written their assignments and it had said yes. And he believed it. Brilliant. Now, when it comes to AI, we really need to be considering knowledge and wisdom. So AIs have knowledge, they've been taught things, but we need to think of this as questionable knowledge, because they've been taught with things on the internet. And you may not know this, but sometimes people on the internet are wrong. Only sometimes, though. But this is the kind of information that we are giving to an AI. They do not have wisdom and they do not have the ability to reason, which human brains do. Oh no, we've already heard about this today. Don't worry, I knew the others were talking about this, so this is just really high level. So if there's anyone here who's now thinking, I don't get this RAG stuff, I'm going to go through it just at this high level. So, retrieval augmented generation, for long. So when we use an LLM without RAG, our user will ask a question. In this case, which IT courses teach me communication skills? And they do that via a prompt. So we're answering this question. And that gets sent to the LLM, which comes back probably with some abstract, convincing nonsense because it doesn't actually know. It hasn't been taught that information. But it'd be very convincing. I actually did try this, and it will come back with just absolute nonsense. Try it with ChatGPT. So when we use RAG, we can ask that same question, but it goes via this retriever. And that retrieves information from various sources, which might be a vector database, it might be directly via from folders and things like that. And then that information, which has come back in a nice ranked order, gets put into the prompt. So instead of just the question, it says, answer the question based on this context, gives the information, and then gives the question. That is what goes to the LLM in that case. And then that LLM will hopefully do what you've asked it to do. You can't trust it to have really followed your instructions, but it will use the context you've given it. So it can return a list of courses from the data that it's just got that from. Now, this retriever pipeline is really key to all this. So these retrievers can be built into some LLMs, and there's various open source versions of them. And then they use things like semantic search, keyword search. There's lots of different types of search that they can use. And they can get it from one or more sources. As I said, things like vector, DBs, PDFs, all the information that you want to put into it. And then they're going to extract that information. They're going to rank it, they're going to format it into text that can be given to the LLM. And they're going to include some metadata with that, which you can then use in your question. Now, the thing here is that the performance here is really critical. If your retriever pipeline brings back rubbish information, your LLM cannot do anything good with that information. If it's slow, your users aren't going to be able to use it because people have they just can't concentrate these days, can they? So how does RAG and AI help with communication? We do an awful lot of communication in our jobs. Think of all the stand-ups that you participate in or progress reports that you might write. You're creating and reading diagrams. That's a form of communication. Email and messaging, I bet you do an awful lot of that and you don't want to, but that is communication as well. Then we've got meetings, online and in person. Who doesn't love meetings? Okay. Then we've got documentation. You're all writing documentation, aren't you? Yeah, exactly. And of course you read it as well. And then, of course, there's things like presentations. So it might be things like this. It might be giving a presentation to a board or to your colleagues. We have been bombarded over the past year or so with new tools that use AI, and old tools all use AI now. And we probably don't want a lot of it, but here are a few examples of that. So first of all, there's text generation. Now, this is what most people think of as AI, ChatGPT, and the like. Then we've got the things that do visuals. We've seen a little bit of this today. Things like DALL-E, Midjourney. These will create some visuals for you. And I'll show you how these can be rather distracting and off-putting and not entirely useful for your software architecture. Then we've got things to do with presentations. Now, I have run architecture kata competitions where teams put together a design based on some input, and I've seen some teams use these kind of tools to create a 5-minute presentation to explain their design. And I have to say that I tend to prefer the manual ones, not these ones, because the manual ones, people actually think about what's important to put in there, whereas this kind of thing tends to be some flashy video with a voiceover, and it doesn't tell me anything about their design. So beware of that kind of thing. Video, lots of things there, similar to presentations, but I think it's quite scary, the kind of videos that AI can put together, although you tend to always be able to tell. Some of you might have used audio tools, things like Otter, to transcribe meetings or to perform translations on the fly. Lots of those. And then, of course, the huge area that is productivity. Our email inboxes, we hate them. There are loads of tools that will apparently sort them out for you. My recommendation is to try not to use email at all. Use other things like Kanban boards and stuff like that. Avoid email. But there are some tools that will help you with that. There are things like spelling, grammar. There are an awful lot of tools in this space. It has exploded over the past year or so. But today I want to look at these two areas. So we're going to look at text and we're going to look at visuals. But as I said, these visual tools aren't actually any good for our software architecture diagrams. So instead of those, I'm going to look at some of these tools which kind of sit in the middle here. And these are tools which will help you. They're more specialized for creating diagrams, but using AI, not using pictures. So when we're thinking about text, it's often things to do with knowledge and documentation. So how can AI help us to become a better communicator when it comes to those? How do we communicate knowledge? We've got wikis, we've got our software repositories, we've got folders and files. I bet you've got lots on your computer, you've got your OneDrive, Dropbox, all these different places. Then we've got things like knowledge bases. Quite often customer service will have their own separate knowledge base for all those questions that keep coming in. And knowledge apps such as Notion, Confluence. Oh, sorry, I said the C word. Sorry if you do use Confluence. None of them are that brilliant, to be fair. And then there's things like messages and email. We're always sharing knowledge using those. I recommend not doing that because you will never find it again, but we do that. And so when we really think about it, knowledge is everywhere. And if you have less than this many places in your company where you store knowledge, you're doing well. These are all just examples. I don't particularly recommend any of these. But when we're thinking about RAG, we can use it to unify multiple sources of information. Because even if you tell people, we have 100 different places we put information, you're never going to get agreement on where you're going to put it all. No company can put all their information in one place. People need it in different places. And so you're always going to have multiple sources. So we can look at using RAG to find this information either directly via things like APIs, or we can actually embed it into a vector database. Now, of course, this all takes time and effort. And when you're thinking, where are we going to store this knowledge? I hope that you're thinking, what's my exit strategy for this tool? Everyone should always be thinking that. But now you also need to think, how can I allow AI to read the information from this tool? Am I going to have to export it? Does it have an API? So you don't want your information to get stuck in a proprietary tool that you cannot use with RAG, if you're going to go down the RAG path, of course. And this means that we can use natural language to ask questions. Now, these are the type of questions that you cannot Google. You cannot search these on the internet. They're specific to your business. Things like, how do I interact with the Riker API? How can customers use the new beta? Can all customers use the new beta? And which services are involved in the trade workflow? And so people within your company can ask questions like that. And you can also validate the answer. In your RAG pipeline, once you've got that information, you can change that prompt. You do some prompt engineering. So you can do things like make the LLM aware of today's date. It then knows which information is the newest information from what it's being chosen. And it can say things like, last week, this was published. If it doesn't know today's date, it can't do that. You can also ask it to provide sources. And when you've done searches on places like Google recently, you might have seen that you get these AI answers pop up. And usually they have these little numbers in it and tell you which sources it's come from. Now, I think of this as explainability. Now, when Neil Ford and Mark Richards talk about software architecture, they talk about architecture characteristics, the ilities. Explainability is the one that you need for AI because of it hallucinating and wanting to answer your questions. So you want to be telling it to give you those sources. When you're developing your RAG pipeline, you've been told today you need to test it. And part of that testing is going to be, where did this information come from? Is it correct? If the AI is just giving you a load of information, that's a lot harder to work out. So you want to know the sources. Explainability is really key here. But remember that AI cannot reason. Here's a nice DALL-E image. Nice distracting feature. Who can spot the oddity in this picture? Pardon? It is a rather huge parrot, that's true. But I think the main really odd thing here is the earring. It's gone, if it's going to be a parrot, surely it's a pirate, and pirates wear earrings. But oh, wait a minute, this pirate's wearing a suit, so he's in an office, so we will make the earring out of a paperclip. It's just a bit odd. And this is one of the better ones. I had some really odd ones. Come and find me, and I'll see if I can find them for you if you really want. So AI, when it comes to LLMs, is a stochastic parrot. It's just giving you back what it thinks is the next most likely word that you need. So that was all about the text and the knowledge. I said I was going to talk about diagrams as well. So can AI help with your visual communication? There are lots and lots and lots of different types of diagrams that people use. But AI cannot understand a PNG image or a JPEG. So it can't use all these different types of diagrams. What it can do is use diagrams as code, because it can be taught the syntax in exactly the same way as it can be taught Java or C++ or any other programming language. And so we can use diagrams as code with AI, but diagrams as code are limited in the different types of diagrams that they can produce. So we're already being tied down here. So I talked about the different tools earlier. I said that there were some generic ones. So any LLM, I say any, don't try this with Hugging Face. It doesn't get it at all. Or at least last time I tried it, it didn't get it. I'm going to have to try it again. But things like ChatGPT, you can use those with these. They're the more generic ones. But then there are other tools here. And don't worry, when you get the slides, it mentions all the tools in one of the in the appendix. So don't worry about trying to work out what they are. But when we're using these specialized tools, we get a few advantages, because although they normally sit on top of the generic tools, they're doing a bit of prompt engineering for us. And so that can help with the diagrams we're trying to get out of it. It also means you've got less control and you don't really know what it's doing with it. And some of them are a bit limited in how much you can edit that diagram afterwards. But if we try and put a prompt, such as this one, it's very generic. I need to know exactly what I want it to do. I'm asking it to create a sequence diagram, and I'm saying things like, a customer UI uses a customer API to search media. The customer API uses the media search to search media. And so I'm giving it very explicit instructions as to what to produce. And this tool I was using first was called ChatUML, which sits on top of ChatGPT. Now, when I first did this, which was January 24 this year, I tried this with ChatGPT and the other tools, and at that point, ChatGPT didn't interface with DALL-E like it does now. And so when I tried it the other week, and it came up and it said, I'll create that, and then it said, download sequence diagram. And I thought, oh, this is exciting. What's it going to come up with from DALL-E? So I clicked on that link, and I opened the file, and it wouldn't open. So I tried again. I'd started it again. It generated another one, and I downloaded it, and I thought, come on, you can do this. And I opened it, and it gave me this. It's perfect. As you can see, it is a detooled sequence dengomam. And dengomam is the name I'm now going to give all diagrams produced by DALL-E. It's not a diagram, it's a dengomam. And I quite like the color scheme, I have to say that. And the isometric, I mean, that's quite cool. But there's a car in there, and a lorry, and some kind of massive fan. I don't know. But you may have noticed, if you fiddle about with things like DALL-E, DALL-E cannot spell. It just cannot cope with text. And it's funny, because sometimes it gets it right. It says customer UI in there, but then it says detooled sequence dengomam. And Apia instead of API. I don't really know what goes on behind the scenes of DALL-E, but it must be some kind of crazy party, I think. So, back to ChatUML, which sits on top of ChatGPT, as I said. So I gave it this long prompt here, gave it specific instructions, and it did give me PlantUML, because that's what ChatUML, you can guess by the name, ChatUML returns PlantUML. And it did render, and it gave me a diagram like this. But if you look at the amount of text that I had to type and the amount of PlantUML, it's about the same, isn't it? So why on earth did I bother? If I know PlantUML, it's going to be quicker to do that. I could probably do it more quickly even in Draw.io, or, okay, I probably couldn't do it quicker in Visio, because Visio is just awful. But lots of tools, you could do it quicker drawing it as well. Now, with these more specific tools, you can put something in very generic. You can just literally write, add a database, and it will try and do this for you. But where did this web UI and backend come from? I didn't ask for that. It's gone, ooh, you're likely to want these things, so I'm going to return it to you. And you've got to spot what it's done that you didn't ask for. It's quite easy in this case because it's so small. But what if I'd given it something really long? Now I've got to work out which bits has it done right, which bits has it gone, ooh, this would be helpful, wouldn't it? No, it's not very helpful. But that's not really how we do software design and architecture. We get information from lots of different places. Sometimes it might be things like a transcription of a meeting. It might be notes we've taken when we've been in some kind of workshop. Or it might be things like a requirements document. So I mentioned architecture katas earlier, and there's quite a few of these that you can find online that you can work through. This one's from Neil Ford and Mark Richards' website for their Fundamentals of Software Architecture book. So if you have a look on there, you can find lots of other ones. And I thought, right, what can AI do with this very generic information? There's going to be information in there that's not relevant. Can it filter that out in the same way that a human can? And so I asked Bard if it could create a use case diagram for me. And it said, as a language model, I'm not able to assist you with that. Thanks very much. So if I ask it to create a use case diagram and return it as PlantUML and Mermaid, it says no. If I ask it to return a PlantUML use case diagram, it says, OK, I can do that. So it got that first part of the sentence and went, no, I can't do that. I'm just going to ignore the rest of it. And so it did manage to return some PlantUML for me, and it gave me a little description here. Don't worry, you're not supposed to be able to read it. You can have a look on the slides if you want. But it didn't actually work. It didn't compile. Pasted it in to PlantUML, and it went, nope. So I said, right, Bard, fix the syntax errors in the plant UML you previously returned. And it went, oh, OK. And it returned this awful diagram, which even if you look at it close up, is horrible to read. But it did tell me what it corrected. Very useful. Now, ChatGPT 3.5. I asked it to do exactly the same thing. And it went, yeah, I can return you some plant UML. I can return you some mermaid. But the mermaid didn't work. Now, in this case, I could have asked it to correct it, but because I know a bit about mermaid, I spotted that it had parentheses in one of the labels, and it doesn't do that. So I corrected that one quite easily. Then I did the same thing with ChatUML. Now, you'd think that this would produce sort of the same thing because it sits on top of ChatGPT. Oh, it didn't work again, despite the fact that this is actually using some prompt engineering underneath there. So I said, go on, correct the syntax for me. And it went, sorry, here you go. Here's some corrected syntax. So I did manage to get a diagram, a use case diagram in this case, out of all three of these tools. But the real question here is, are they correct? Have they actually got the correct information out of that Kata prompt? Have they done the same as a human would? And the answer to that is no. It's completely different to what I would have done. And if you have a look at the slides, you can see all the differences here. But there are sometimes it has kind of misunderstood the roles, sometimes it's misunderstood the use cases. And the other thing that I do without being asked to do it is I show what assumptions I have made, because when we are given information, we never have all the information that we need. We always need to write down some kind of assumption and go and check it with someone. Put your hand up if you've ever been given all the information you need at the start of a project. And that's 0. So, you're writing down assumptions, I'm writing down assumptions. In this case, I can even do it still in plant UML, because you can create little tables like this. So when we think about this knowledge and text, and also these diagrams, what are good uses for it, and what are the problems that we are facing at the moment? So if you have an existing mermaid plant UML diagram, and you want to make a complex change to it that's not going to be easy to just do a kind of find and replace, then you could ask something like ChatGPT or one of these other tools to make that change for you. But you're going to have to check it, of course. You might want to fix some syntax with an existing diagram. It might get it right. It might not. You could use it to actually help you learn plant UML and mermaid. If you are struggling with it, you could ask it questions about what you have done. It can be a very useful rubber duck. But do think of it as a rubber duck with the brain of a rubber duck, because you can't actually trust it. What about translating between them? Maybe you've got a mermaid diagram and you need it in plant UML, or vice versa. But the thing is, I'm sure there are already tools that do that without using AI. There were loads of perfectly good tools that never used AI and now all use AI, apparently. And then extracting ideas from free-form text, which is what we've been looking at today. I've put a big exclamation mark there because you have seen that it doesn't do that good a job. So when we're thinking about extracting these ideas, it's going to be better to ask it to give you text, summarize things like that, rather than create a diagram from this, because it's going to be easier for you to check that information and use that information compared to the diagram. at least at the moment. We've got a few problems. It doesn't return code that renders every time. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. If you're asking it to fix that code for you, you've then got to trust that it's only fixed that one thing and it hasn't changed something else. So you've got to then check the whole thing again. When we're thinking about the RAG and getting information from all our knowledge sources, we need to be using RAG to minimize those hallucinations. We need to have that pipeline, but that means time and it means money. So that is a bit of a problem there. To get any kind of useful output at the moment is often slower than just actually writing the plant UML or Mermaid or even creating the diagram. And that's the reason that I've now created a new course, a new workshop, where I teach people plant UML, Mermaid. We look at Structurizer as well and using them with AI. Because you need to have that knowledge. You cannot trust the AI to do things for you. The output, we've been told this already, needs careful checking. So any time that you have saved by using AI is probably going to be gobbled up by checking what has come out, unless it's a very basic thing. And if it's very basic, you probably could have done it yourself. So why are we bothering? And then we've got the problem that it produces different outputs with the same input. It's not a pure function, as we would call it in code. The output of LLMs is non-deterministic. You can put in the same inputs over and over again and get different outputs over and over again. That sounds like absolute hell for writing tests. Whenever you're writing tests in code, you put the inputs in and you expect the same thing out each time, or at least you know the parameters that are going to change. Maybe it changes depending on date. So on a leap year, you expect this answer, and on a Sunday, you expect this answer, and on a Tuesday and a Wednesday, you expect this answer. But to test an LLM, you can't even rely on that kind of thing. So good luck with your tests. And the big thing we need to think about here is adding value when we're using AI. If you're not adding value, if your effort is more than the output you're getting, then you may as well have either not done it or done it in a different way. There are an awful lot of rabbit holes that you can fall down. I quite like going and trying to get images out of DALL-E. It's quite a lot of fun, actually. But set an alarm or a timer or something, because you will get sucked into that kind of thing. Now, I want to show you a quote here that's from last century, but it is relevant, I promise you. This is from 1998, from Neil Postman, from his 5 Things We Need to Know About Technological Change. Now, he says, technological change is not additive, it is ecological. Now, when we have a new technology, we think of it as additive. We have what we have now, plus AI. And that is not true. He says, a new medium does not add something, it changes everything. And I think people are probably starting to come to that realization now that AI has permeated so far. He gives a really good example. He says, in the year 1500, after the printing press was invented, you did not have old Europe plus the printing press. You had a different Europe. And so the problem we get when we are thinking about AI as being additive is that we are actually losing control. One does not simply add a new technology. I do try and get this meme in to as many talks as I can with different things. So if we think of it as additive, it's very easy for a technology to determine how we use it, and we lose control of it. Think of email. When email was invented, people thought, oh, great, asynchronous communication. This is our silver bullet. This is amazing. But consider how many knowledge workers now spend their whole day in their email inbox, waiting for a reply that they need to jump on straight away. Email has taken over how we work. And a lot of people get sucked into that email black hole. It even sucks up our time at home because we have our own personal email addresses. So what will be the unintended consequences of AI? We're already seeing some of these. Think about all the copyright lawsuits. There are certain billionaires who are saying, oh, but I can't advance technology without stealing stuff, without asking for it and paying for it, so it must be all right. It's like, yeah, okay. So there are various lawsuits going on at the moment. Then there are all the things, all the hallucinating. People quoting things in court, teachers accusing their students of plagiarism just on the basis of ChatGPT telling them that it's been plagiarized. So we really need to be careful with what we're doing now. Right, a few takeaways. You may have got the gist of this already, but I want you to be really selective with how you use AI. It's really easy to fall into this trap of thinking that it will just fix everything, and it really, really won't. We need to be thinking about, can it help us? Is it going to make things actually worse? You should be considering using RAG if you are wanting to minimize hallucinations and actually get very specific information. But do remember that it is time and money. Of course, it's cheaper than trying to train your own model. So there's that consideration as well. You can use an AI to help you learn. But please remember that your AI teacher may get something right today. It may get that same thing wrong tomorrow. So be very aware that it does not get things right all the time. And if you are planning on wanting to use AI with your diagrams, you need to learn the diagrams as code. Imagine if you'd been using AI to create all these diagrams as code. You didn't quite understand it, but it's all fine. But then one of these lawsuits wins, and all these LLMs get shut down. What are you going to do now? Suddenly, you've got all this information, and you don't know what to do with all these diagrams as code. Or what if somebody goes, oh, well, if I've got to pay for the copyright material now, I'm going to start charging, and your LLM becomes prohibitively expensive. You really need to understand what's coming out of LLMs. There have been a lot of managers going, oh, I don't need as many developers anymore. I can just employ people who have no knowledge, and I don't have to pay these expensive developers. But they're forgetting that the stuff that comes out, people need to understand it to know if it's correct. Neil was talking about that tidal wave of code. Yep, it runs, but we don't really know what they've done with it. Because remember what I said earlier, there are some people on the internet who are wrong. Yeah, just one or two. So this is actually one of the better ones that it managed to produce. But this is just my reminder that when it comes to LLMs, they are a stochastic parrot. And you wouldn't trust a parrot to speak for you if it was just sitting on your shoulder, especially if it has been trained using information from the social media network formerly known as Twitter. Imagine that, parrot from Twitter. Anyway. So I started this off by saying, can we become a 10x communicator? And I'm going to finish by saying that we need to make sure that AI doesn't mean it actually takes 10 times longer to communicate. Because it's very easy to fall into this thinking that it's going to help, whereas actually not using AI may be a lot quicker. So, one final piece of advice, and this is from a very reliable source. Never trust anything that can think for itself if you can't see where it keeps its brain. Does anyone know who said this? Yep, it's Arthur Weasley. So he really does know a lot about these things that we muggles dream up to cope with not having magic, doesn't he? So it's a good piece of advice, that one. So thank you very much. If you are interested in improving your communication and becoming more of a 10x communicator, then you can check out my book, Communication Patterns. Contact me if you want via my website, and just for people who are watching this talk, I have a 20% off my workshop code there. So if you want to use that, just contact me via my website and we can talk about diagrams as code or the other things that I talk about. So we should have some time for questions, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jacqui. I hope everybody liked the talk, because we do have many questions. So we have 10 minutes, 8 minutes ahead, so we'll try to answer them all.
Okay.
Jacqui, first question. Have you had the chance to approach a reverse engineering problem with a GenAI plus RAG in order to generate some architecture views from already existing uncommented legacy code?
From already existing code. It's not something I have tried. I do know some people have tried doing that, and there are some tools which claim to be able to do that. So I can't personally say that that works, but there are people looking at it. And of course, this is when we need to think about how well that code's been written. If that code has been written by an AI, you're probably going to get awful documentation and diagrams generated from the code. If it's been written by a human, hopefully we can get something good from it. Next.
Perfect. Second question. Okay, I have so. Can RAG replace organic wide search in the likes of Elasticsearch?
Pardon?
It's like, can RAG replace an Elasticsearch?
Can I see them?
Yeah. When you make a search.
Yes, so Elasticsearch, for anyone who doesn't know, is something that's commonly been used for this kind of thing in organizations before AI. So I would say that AI is probably going to be less limited than Elasticsearch in what it can talk to. If you can get the information into a vector database, then it will probably be able to get the information from more sources than, say, Elasticsearch can. But I haven't used Elasticsearch a huge amount, so I can't compare that easily.
Which techniques and tools do you like to use that saves your time in your job?
That takes my time.
Yeah.
So if I'm creating tools by hand, diagrams by hand, I like to use Draw.io. It's free and open source. You can use it on their website as well as with an app. So that's what I always use when I run workshops, because it's nice and easy to use. I hate Visio. You might be able to tell that. Yeah. I know there are some organizations that say it's Visio or nothing, and I'm very sorry if you work for one of those. So yes, Draw.io is probably my favorite. There's another website called Excalidraw. That is also very good. That's very good if you're collaborating on an image. And then other diagrams, I like PlantUML and Mermaid. They're both useful for different things, so I can't say one of those is better than the other. You have to have a look at them to see what type of diagrams you want. They've both got pros and cons. And then if you're looking at the C4 model, which I quite like for diagramming. I can recommend having a look at that if you haven't. If you're using that, then Simon Brown, who invented that, has also created Structurizer, which is, I mean, it's not really diagrams as code, it's more you creating a model and then creating views from that, but in kind of a better way than has been done in the past. So those are some of my favorites.
Thank you. And I would say the last question, is Smart UML language standardized?
Pardon?
Smart UML language standardized? Any specifications?
Oh, so the chat UML, it might be that what they're referring to. So yeah, there's two different things I talked about. I talked about chat UML, which was the tool that sits on top of ChatGPT, and so that you just type in natural language and you get plant UML back. And then I also talked about plant UML, and yes, that has its own syntax. Then Mermaid's got its own syntax, and there are quite a few similarities because Mermaid's newer and they based some of what they do on plant UML. And then Structurizer, again, has its own syntaxes. So, good fun. I could recommend having a look.
Thank you, Jacqui. Big applause.